Okay, so we'll get started. Almost everybody's on. And um, did y'all grab the list from ELC? It's on there if you haven't. So random assortment of what I could cover um, around the house here that maybe we haven't covered together, or you haven't seen, or we haven't officially covered. And yeah, and you'll see wild, crazy munchkins going through here. Josiah and Lilia, my assistants. Um, but I know it's probably a little bit of a cliche in a way, but I couldn't resist. So on our mailbox here is the other Clematis. So remember, we learned evergreen Clematis or Clematis back in the winter. And this is a deciduous form. And I just put it on your list as Clematis jackmanii, and just Clematis is the common name. But I know you guys have seen these, I'm sure. They're fairly common. And this really big flowered form is not native. This would be from like Europe and Asia. But we do have some really cool native species of Clematis. And they tend to have a very different looking flower. One of those is Clematis crispa. And there are more than that one. Here in the Southeast, the ones that I'm familiar with tend to be bottomland species. So it's kind of like bottomland meadows. And imagine just a kind of a tight, waxy, bell-shaped flower. And if you look it up online, you'll see it's really unique and really quite beautiful. The native forms are. And I have seen them available from like a natives nursery. Like there's a great one near Knoxville where I used to live called Sunlight Gardens. They have a great website if you want to check it out. They have a lot of really rare and unusual native plants, and I think they actually do mail order, so you could get one of the native species from them. But these more exotic species are not invasive, and of course the flowers are enormous. And especially in like April and May, they bloom really heavily, primarily on new wood, new growth. So a lot of Clematis or Clematis growers will recommend actually cutting this down to just like leave maybe a foot sticking up towards the end of winter, and then just let it totally grow out. From that, and it's amazing how fast it will grow out, and then it be in bloom like within weeks of coming out of bud. It's a twining vine, big hardiness range, like probably zones 5 down to 9, and just these big star-shaped flowers. So totally deciduous, totally goes away for the winter. And you don't have to cut it back to the ground in the winter, and it will sort of regrow from some of last year's viney growth if you leave it up. But I think you'll find that like every few years or so, it is helped by the sort of rejuvenation of cutting it down and kind of making it grow back out. They come in almost every color you can imagine, like cherry reds and pinks and white and all shades of blue and purple and bicolors. And if you go to that website I put on today's sheet, it's kind of cool. Right here in Athens, we have a local grower, a specialty grower of Clematis. I've never been there. I'd love to go. And they have just all kinds of unusual types and species. And I meant to look yesterday, and I fell down a different rabbit hole looking at the Antique Rose website, but I was going to see if the Clematis grower has Clematis montana, which is this really cool pale pink form that is pretty vigorous. Like it gets about 20 or 25 feet long, so you can cover a really significant arbor or something with it. A lot of these hybrid types, like I'm showing you on my mailbox, they just get like 6 or 8 feet in length, or climbing height, and But what's so awesome about that, right, is that it's so manageable. You know, like it's a very user-friendly vine that's not gonna eat the world like wisteria or a lot of other vines. Yeah, we will. We will.
I have a question for Dad.
Yeah, go for it.
If you don't cut it down in the winter, does it look okay, or what does it look like if you just leave it up?
Well, it's you know, I don't mind it, but I don't mind sort of dead looking things in the winter. But it does look a little scraggly.
Would Piet Udolph approve?
Oh, definitely. I don't think he would cut it back until he had to, maybe, you know, like late February. I'm always amazed how early Clematis starts to bud out. Like it's an early emerging genus. Like it'll start budding out and putting out new growth, and then we'll have another freeze or two, but it's not super frost tender, so like usually it's not damaged. I'll just incidentally, this clump of stuff coming up next to it is called Crinum Lily. And I mean, gosh, like most things, there are native crinums to North America, and then there are species from other parts of the world. And this type that I have here coming up is not native, but if you find yourself wanting to look up plants today, crinums are pretty cool. And this will make a huge, like 2 foot by 2 foot clump of very tropical looking foliage. And it's a pass along plant. People, y'all are getting too crazy. Calm down. And they would call this milk and wine lily because when it blooms, it puts up these big flower scapes, and with these giant flowers very closely resembling an amaryllis. Very fragrant, and they smell wonderful. And this form tends to bloom in June, really heavy, and then will sporadically rebloom after that. It's also fun to dig these up because the bulbs are enormous. They're like 6-inch diameter, giant amaryllis looking bulbs. So easy to share. And yeah, maybe we can work a milk and wine lily trade for that poppy. Catherine's poppy. All right.
What's that?
Looks, I think that's, I can't tell, it's too much sunlight. Okay. Now back up. Let's see, see if I need to let anybody else in.
Okay, I'll die. No, this one.
Those irises right in front of you?
Yeah. So that's what the monkeys behind me here are playing in the irises here. This is my attempt at, you know, a rain garden here. You too. I think so. So you can, here's in a scale figure, you can see how tall these get. They're down in a pretty deep ditch here, and I wish they were in bloom, and they're almost there. I don't know if you can see this bud that will be open in just like tomorrow, maybe, or the day after. But most of these are Iris virginicus, the you know, bluish purple looking iris. But I have about 5 species in here. I have some Louisiana iris, and I have another form that is new to me this year that I can't wait to see it bloom over here on the side. And I will admit I have a couple of clumps of yellow flag in here too, so forgive me. That's juncus down there in the middle. Yeah, some juncus that I planted. And you'll have to come visit in June, because see, this big clump of cut back stuff here is one of the cold hardy hibiscus. And so I just cut it back a couple of weeks ago. I like leaving the stalks up for the winter. They're very interesting. But the new shoots are coming out, and this will make this 6 by 6 foot tropical looking clump of foliage and flowers primarily in the month of July with dinner plate sized cherry pink flowers. So it's not for the faint of heart.
How big?
It's a 6 by 6 shrub. Yeah, and they love wet feet. That's why it's down here in the ditch garden. And there's many forms of that. Another fun plant rabbit trail to go down. Look up the various hybrids of hibiscus. And we have some cool natives. I don't know if some of you maybe learned in the fall class, like hibiscus coccineus is our native bottomland red flowering hibiscus, and hibiscus moschutos is another native that is pale pink to white. And so a lot of cool hybrids have been formed, like nativars basically, from just those two native species. And then of course there's all the other interspecific forms from species from other parts of the world. So the one I have here is called raspberry ice. So it's like giant pinkish red flowers, well, actually I think I said that wrong. This one is called muy grande, but anyway. Any questions?
So we can actually build a rain garden here. If
You say, can we do rain gardens?
yes, here. I mean, if you do a rain garden, those plants are good for here, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, we could do wonderful rain gardens in the Southeast. I mean, that's what I think of. I mean, Fourth Ward Park is in some ways the giant rain garden.
Yeah.
Especially the pond area of it, the way that it was planted, at least. And yeah, I hope that becomes, just kind of the norm as it catches on. Hey, y'all get out of there. You're going to ruin those.
Ooh.
Yeah, y'all get to hear the disciplinary action here. Performing for you all. Okay, so they're ruining the Iris virginicus. Lily at Josiah, do not jump in the iris. Yeah, just leave it alone. It's taking y'all back to your childhood, isn't it?
I was never bad like
I don't believe it.
that.
Okay. I don't need it yet. Check with me in about 20 minutes, okay? So down here on the ground is Homestead Verbena, mixed with weeds, but this is a pretty common and favorite perennial. What? No, they're not. Buddy, I got to teach my class, okay? And it, I guess you would consider Homestead a nativar. It at least has one native parent. I think it is purely native. I want to double check that, but it's a selection from, we do have a native occurring species, a couple actually, Verbena tenuisecta, and Verbena canadensis. So Homestead Purple was a selection that Armitage and Durr apparently were on a road trip together. Can you imagine? And pulled over on the side of the road and selected this from a wild population as just an outstanding, seedling variant, basically. And so it was named Homestead Purple. Maybe it was found at an old homestead. But it has these wonderful kind of like almost grape or amethyst purple clustered flowered heads. And it's a creeping perennial. It has these very small, oppositely arranged and kind of hairy, very like intricately cut leaves, very small. But the habit of the plant's wonderful because it spreads out to like a good 3-foot diameter from one plant, and doesn't get more than 12 inches tall, and blooms very heavily in April and May. It usually goes through a tired spell during the heat of the summer, so it's less interesting in the hot months. You'll sometimes get some rebloom in the fall. And pretty decent hardiness range. I'd safely say 6 to 9. I'm not sure about further north than that. It's considered a perennial, but I will tell you from my own experience that it's kind of a half-hardy perennial. You can get it to last a few years, but it's very susceptible to winter root rot, and so you'll often lose kind of hunks out of it, from one growing season to the next. So like this in the spring, you'll notice that, there's, this piece of it over here is not alive anymore. And, but it does have the ability to root. The stems do root as they spread out and touch the ground. So you can kind of, if you'll kind of tend it a little bit, you can sort of have your own self-rejuvenating, patch of this, and just sort of continue to replant it where it dies out, or move it around. And so it's a good plant to have, I think.